faculty members that many of you, at least those of you who started last year, might not have had a chance to meet yet, because Rick has been away on a professional development leave, sabbatical. And he spent this time in the Netherlands doing a lot of biking back and forth. What was it? 10 miles?
12 miles over and back. So I did 24 miles a day.
24 miles a day. That's why he's so trim. And I'm going to let Rick kind of introduce his research area in more depth to you. But he does a lot of work related to micro-credentialing and badging, as well as many other things. I hope that all of you, or most of you at least, take his lit review course, because he does a great job of that and is well known across the college for that class. In fact, we've had other departments come and say, can we send our students to your, your lit review course? Because he does such a great job with that. The other thing that I just want to say about Rick is that he is a great mentor. So if you're still thinking about looking for someone to mentor you in your research project or development project or evaluation project, definitely go talk to him, because if his area of interest connect with yours, he does a great job of mentoring students. So with that, let's give Rick a hand and let him start.
Well, thank you. And if we're going to talk about mentoring, what you may not know is that my thesis mentor was Charles Graham. So
I'm a grandpa!
He's my academic father. So yeah, he can be your academic grandpa too if you work together. So I've had quite a bit of culture shock this last year, and I'm not talking about the fact that we lived in the Netherlands for 6 months. Actually, the fact that I used to teach the foundations class, which meant I knew every student in the department. And now I know nobody in the department. And so this is quite the culture shock for me, and I hope I can get to know you better over this year. It's been hard for me to be separated and to feel like I don't know the students quite as well as I used to. So yes, I've been on sabbatical in 2 different countries, actually, mostly in the Netherlands. We were in the Netherlands for 4 months, and we were in Slovenia for 1 month, doing work related to open badges. I wanted to do that work in Europe, because that is where open badges originated, was in Europe. And so I wanted to go back there and see how they were using open badges and micro-credentials. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that today, and talk about that. But first I thought I'd have a little bit of fun and maybe share a little bit of culturalisms about the Netherlands. Has anyone been to the Netherlands? All right, so you can kind of check me on this. But a few things here. I know Rachel has as well. We'll talk a little bit about what it means to go Dutch. A couple of things about that. Number one, the Dutch are the most, you think Europe's this way, but Dutch are like the most direct people in Europe. They are very direct. So my first stop in the airport, I'm walking around the airport, and the airport in Amsterdam is a big shopping mall, and they're selling things, and this one lady is selling these face creams. She's like, you, come here. Your face looks terrible. Beauty by Creed. And I'm like, oh, thank you. I guess that's a nice customer approach, I suppose, but they're very direct. They tell you exactly what they're thinking and expect that that's a good thing. So, they're very direct to you. What's this?
I don't know, somebody doesn't have their microphone muted,
okay.
so I just turned the audio
All
on.
right. Number 2, the Dutch really value work-life balance to the extreme. So I sent this email at the very beginning of March, like March 5th. This is April 1st. Or what she says is, I said basically, help. I need help getting approval to do this research study or something. It was something important, I can't remember, because she was the head of the department there. And sent me back and says, I am out of the office until April 1st, so 3 weeks. And during those 3 weeks, they will not answer email, they will not do anything. And it was actually really hard, because as I was trying to negotiate this and get approval, like IRB approval for my research, and I would email them and they say, oh, I'm out of the office for 3 weeks. I'm like, okay, I get it, that's good, all right, cool. And then 3 weeks later, they would get back and say, oh, hi, who you really need to talk to is Susie down the hall, let me forward you to her. And then I get an email from Susie saying, I'm out of the office for 3 weeks. And so I went through sometimes these 6-week cycles of like waiting for people to get back with me. So very different from America that way. But they do appreciate taking time off, spending time with their family, and being with their family and their neighbors and their communities. So, in fact, on one of the expat listservs that we're on, somebody posted and said, my husband's looking for a job in the Netherlands, and nobody will answer his emails. They're not really email-centric. They're much more in-person-centric, which maybe is a good thing. Maybe we need to be more that way. But they are very email-centric, and so the advice somebody said was just show up and things will happen. And we found that to be the case. They weren't great at answering my emails, and I thought, oh my goodness, they don't really want me to be there. But then once I got there, I ended up giving presentations 2 or 3 times a week. Like everyone wanted me to be speaking to everybody, and I kind of went all over the place. And so they're very friendly people, but they're not internet focused as much as they are in-person focused, which is maybe a good thing. All right, number 3, the Dutch have the coolest way to propose marriage. And since we're at BYU, I thought I'd bring this up. Maybe you can impress somebody this way. But these are called bridal klompen. So the klompen are the shoes, the wooden shoes that they wear, that they still wear. Actually, I see people with wooden shoes out by the back door, and if they need to run into the garden for something, they'll just throw on the wood shoes and run out to the garden. They use them because they were the original work boots to protect your feet. And they're actually not too uncomfortable. They're all right. But these are the bridal shoes, and so the idea is that a potential groom would hand carve a pair of bridal shoes like this, and this is what they would look like. Lots of spirals and intricate work like this, and they would set them out by the bride's door, and if she started wearing the shoes, then she accepted your proposal, and you were engaged. So isn't that cool? So that was the way that they would propose marriage. So while we were there, we paid a retired guy who was just trying to keep up the craft, and he made us some bridal klompen. So these are our bride shoes that we have in our house. Now this is the Manti Temple where we were married, so kind of fun. So I thought that was kind of a fun tradition. Number 4, Dutch farmers markets are awesome. These were our drug dealers, is what we call them. These are our cheese providers. Dutch cheese is fantastic. And you go there and they get these big machetes and they whack off pieces. How much do you want? Whack, whack, whack. And then they cut off little slips and give it to you to taste and everything. And we fell in love with Dutch cheese, and it's really hard to come back. Also, we think we do fry sauce in America, in Utah. I thought we were so cool. They have like 10 different kinds of fry sauce, and they put the fries in these cones, and they dump the fry sauce on there, and they have like different flavors. So anyway, that was really fun. Went to the farmers market. The Dutch have the coolest holiday. It's called King's Day. It used to be called Queen's Day. It's whoever happens to be the matriarch or the king or the queen at the time. So there was a queen, and the Queen's Day was her birthday. And then when she abdicated because she was getting older, her son took over and was the king, and now it's King's Day because it's his birthday. So the holiday changes based on whoever the leader is of the country. And what you do is you dress completely in orange. This is my daughter. If you were really doing it, you'd have on like an orange shirt, an orange jacket, an orange tie, something like that. But they go complete orange. And then all the kids take all their stuff out into the center of town, and it's a huge flea market of kids selling stuff. That's the holiday. It's a huge flea market. How's that for a national holiday? Everyone takes the day off, dresses in orange, and buys used stuff from each other. But the thing that was cool about it, and this is kind of very Dutch, is that they were trying to make children independent. So this wasn't just people selling stuff. It was mostly kids selling stuff. And you would go up there and you had to negotiate with the kids, and the parents wanted you to negotiate with the kids and talk to them. And they would have buskers buskers are people playing instruments for money, but it was always kids. So there'd be a kid out there with a violin or a kid with a keyboard, and they'd be playing money with a hat, and you're supposed to throw money in the hat. So it's a big day for kids to be entrepreneurs, which was kind of fun. So, and do it in orange. Dutch museum design is excellent. A lot of times what we do for museums is we try to make these big, huge, bigger the better, right? The more bang for your buck. If you're going to pay to get into the museum, have it be a big one. Like London does that a lot too. But the Dutch do it very differently. They plan each museum to be consumable in one visit. So you go there and you enjoy yourself for 2 or 3 hours and then you leave. And so, but what they do instead is they have this museum card that you get for about $60. That gives you access to all the museums in the country for the entire year. And so you're not worried about the fact that you only spend 2 hours. So instead of trying to kill yourself spending 6 hours at a museum because you want to get every last dollar out of it, instead you just go, you spend an hour, spend 2 hours. And they're usually very narrowly focused. So instead of being very broadly like this is the Museum of Anthropology and it's like everything, it'll be one little sliver of it that they'll focus on. And you just go and you spend an hour, you spend 2 hours, and then that's it. And they're usually very hands-on, very geared towards families, experiencing things in the way it used to be. This was my favorite one. This is the Clock Museum, so a whole museum just on Dutch and German style clocks. And these were the big musical clocks that they would, or musical boxes that they would roll out into the street, and you'd pay money and then they'd turn them on and you'd have a party basically in the street. So anyway, a whole museum based on clock design, which I thought was kind of cool. The Dutch like regulations. For example, this is just related to education. You're not allowed to homeschool, whether you want to or not. You're not allowed to go online in K through 12. You're not allowed to take your kids out of school to go to the museums or anything. You can't do any of that. Once you're on a track, you can't switch tracks very easily. So it's all very regulated. But the Dutch, they would say that they believe they're the freest in the world. It's really interesting. But they believe in, let's talk about it, let's problem solve it. Once we've come up with a solution, we're all going to agree to stick to that solution. And they don't color outside the lines. The Dutch don't. In fact, they would get mad at you if you tried to do something that was a little different. They just didn't understand that. So we actually had to get some legal counsel to try to explain to them that it was okay for our kids to be going to school online in the United States while we were visiting their country. That didn't compute to them. That was a possibility that you could do that kind of thing. And I would tell people that in the College of Education, be like, what are your kids doing? I'm like, oh, they're going to school, online. And they, what? And they just thought that was so interesting. Or homeschooling, you're doing it at home? That doesn't make any sense. Here in America, we take a different approach. Dutch parenting is very hands-off. This is a Dutch tradition called dropping. Once your kid gets to be about 11, I have an 11-year-old, so it's the age, I guess, I should do this. They take their 11-year-olds to the forest, drop them off in the middle of nowhere, and say, see you in the morning. This is like at 11 o'clock at night. They say, see you in the morning, hope you get back for breakfast. And the whole point is for these kids to have to figure it out on their own, how to navigate and how to get back. And no cell phones, a map, but the kids see it as growing up and feeling like I'm now old enough to be able to do things on my own. And so these are some examples of them just dropping them in the middle of anywhere, and they're trying to walk, and they've got their reflective vests on, and they're just trying to find their way home. So they're very hands-off. They believe that children should be allowed to be independent. And,
Sounds like parental hazing to me.
Do they do it as groups? Or?
Yeah, that's.
They do it as groups usually, like small groups or larger groups. The youth program did it too, but they took mercy on our poor American kids and did it during the middle of the day. And just dropped them in the middle of a field with a map and said, all right, we'll catch you in town down the road, in a couple hours. And they had to figure out how to get there. So that's just the Dutch way of doing it. They want their kids to know how to take care of themselves. So anyway. Dutch higher education is by tracks. So you take a big test when you're 11, and that test determines what kind of career track you're going to be in, like technical school versus other kinds, business schools and things like that. And then once you're in a track, it then just goes all the way through higher education that way. And it's very hard to switch from track to track. So this concept of change your major is just kind of foreign to them, actually, and it's interesting. So, for better or for worse, that's another thing to do. So a big major test, the kids stress out about it, and when they're 11 years old. So, finally, the Dutch love biking. Biking, capital country of the world. So this was our very first night in the Netherlands. We showed up. Our shuttle driver dropped us off. It was 8 p.m. at night. We had 5 kids we had to feed. Get on your bike. And that's our Airbnb host had bikes for us. And so we hopped on our bikes and biked down to the grocery store and bought groceries. And that's how you do it in the Netherlands. 50% of all trips are by bicycle in the Netherlands. 50%. If you can think 50% of the cars off the road, that's what it's like to drive in the Netherlands too. It's actually nice driving in the Netherlands because it isn't very trafficy or crowded, even though they're the most densely populated country in Europe, actually. And so they have bike lanes through the nature. They have bike lanes in the cities. It's the only place where when you cross the road, you can get hit by a bus, a car, a bike, a moped, and a pedestrian all at the same time. Like you have to look both ways, because you start crossing, and here you got pedestrians, and here you got bikes, and their bikes are whizzing through it, 20 miles per hour, and then you got to cross here, but they have separate lanes for the bikes, separate lanes for the walkers. Anyway, it's kind of fun. The Dutch bicycle is kind of interesting by design, how it is. I didn't realize you could design a bike differently. I thought bikes looked like mountain bikes. And Dutch bikes are designed for a different kind of experience. They're always this kind of step-through thing where you don't have the bar across the top. It's all meant for urban comfort. The seats are wide, the handlebars sit up so that you actually sit up straight, you don't lean over when you're biking. They always have the baskets on them, the racks on the back. This is what my little 5-year-old would sit on when she'd go biking with my wife. But they're heavy bikes. They're not meant to be thrown on a truck to drive somewhere. They think that's a really weird concept, that in America, we drive somewhere so that we can bike and enjoy nature. And they're like, that doesn't make sense. Why don't you just enjoy nature in your neighborhood and bike in your neighborhood? Like, wouldn't that be more efficient? So they don't understand this concept of like national parks and biking trails, you know, because they just have it everywhere. Funny thing, helmets are optional because you have a lane. You're not worried about cars hitting you. But bike bells and lights aren't. It's against the law to not have a bike bell to tell people you're coming up on them. So they ring their bells to tell you all the time. But because of this, 50% of trips are by bicycle. Driving cars are easier. Their communities are very livable, and their children feel more liberated and independent. They take care of their own school activities, bike to their own stuff. Parents don't drive them places. They tend to just kind of take care of themselves. So it's kind of an interesting way of parenting and way of doing their communities. So this is actually right behind our house, the bike lane that my little girl would go biking on. So anyway, that's Dutch culture, a little bit about Dutch culture. Now let's talk about some of the things I learned about this. And some of you have heard me spiel about open badges before, but some of you probably haven't. So I'm going to give a little bit of an overview about what are open badges, why I think they're kind of a big deal. Because the first thing I always get is people say, are we talking about a degree and a certificate? How's that disruptive to education? But because the whole point of education really, in many senses of the word, is to get us to this end goal of a credential. If we change the credential, then I think we change the way we teach and the way we learn. And so I do think that changing the credential is an innovative and disruptive thing. So I want to talk a little bit about that, and to talk about how they're being used in the Netherlands and actually in Europe, and also here in the United States too, some of the people that I've talked to in my travels this year. So first thing, why we need open badges, why I think we need them. First, because society is changing. This is from Dave Wiley's TEDx talk. He was an adjunct member of and full member of our faculty at one point. But he said, the projection is that we're going to have 120 million people in higher education right now, and that this is going to grow not up to 150 million, but grow by 150 million in the next 20 years. So it's going to double the number of people trying to get education. And he says in his TEDx talk that what this means is that in India, we need to build and staff a new school like every 2 weeks, just to keep up with the demand that we have for higher education. And so it's impossible. The point is it's impossible. We can't fit everybody in our schools, in our higher education institutions that want higher education. This is from the United States. This data is getting a little bit dated, but you can see from 1970, bachelor's degrees were 270,000. By 2010, we have 600,000 bachelor's degrees. So we've almost tripled the number of bachelor's degrees from 1970 to 2010, and that rate is growing even faster now. So lots of people wanting to get degrees. We can't really keep up with that demand like we used to. Lifelong learning is required. New thing in society now is it's not enough. It used to be that you would go to the feet of the master, you'd go to Socrates, you'd say, "Oh great master, can I sit at your feet for 4 years, teach me everything I need to know, and then I'm good for the rest of my life." That's not the way it works anymore. You have to be reskilling and relearning always throughout your life. And so universities need to change, I believe, to acknowledge this reality that people don't just come for 4 years, they come and need to be learning throughout their life. That's something that's changed. The other thing that's changed is that we're learning everywhere rather than just somewhere. It used to be that the only place you could learn was at the university with the masters. But now, if I were to ask you, where are you learning? And you're learning on the internet. You're learning at job, at work. You're learning, everywhere. Learning happens all the time. Why is it kind of arrogant of us a little bit in higher education that the only place that your learning counts is from us at the university? How come that learning doesn't count all that other learning that you're doing in other places, right? So I think we have a credentialing problem here, that we don't recognize the learning that happens everywhere, right? Another thing that's happening is that we're focusing more and more on competencies rather than courses. Why does everything have to be counted as a 3-credit course hour? Why does that have to be the way we think about learning? Why can't we think about learning in terms of how many competencies you need and how many you currently have, and which ones you're lacking? This actually comes from Capella. This is from Capella University, and I love their competency dashboard idea. That you just show the competencies you need for the career you want. And however you get those competencies is fine. You might get them from the university, you might get them in other ways. But that you can get competencies in lots of different ways. This moves us towards competency-based education. Instead of being focused on how much time you spend on your butt in a seat, how much you've actually learned, things that are mastery-based, self-paced according to when you need to do it, and you finish when the mastery is demonstrated rather than when the courses are posted. Another thing we're seeing in societies are that people want experiences more than lectures. It kind of makes sense, because if you just want a lecture, you can go online and get the lecture for cheap, and it'll be a cool video with spinning GIFs and all that kind of stuff. But if you come to the university, students are wanting experiences more than they used to. So a lot of my work, I was just talking to Joe about some of my work previously in social learning. I've always believed this, that learning needed to be about experiences rather than lectures. And I think that that's something we need to keep thinking about in universities as well. People are rethinking the way we do testing. This is Eva Baker. This goes into the idea of experiences rather than lectures. She was the president of AERA, and she said, "My image of a qualification is a validated assessment obtained inside or outside of school." This is the American Educational Research Association president saying this, saying it doesn't have to happen in school. Each qualification is not a new test, but an integrated experience with performance requirements. I shortened this whole thing down to basically saying validated performances. That's what I think assessment needs to be. You show you can do something, and somebody validates that you have that ability. It's a validated performance that shows you have a skill. Learning is open. Open education, we know about that. In this department, students want to be able to take control of their learning, and that's a good thing. That means they're engaged. So this all brings me down to the fact that I think education is changing. I think the needs are changing. I think the practices are changing, the pedagogies are changing. And what hasn't changed very much is the actual credential you get for your learning. And this is where open badges come in, is I think we need credentials to match 21st century learning. And this is why the US Department of Education said that digital badging has the potential to revolutionize education by making us think differently about the whole point of education. So comparing a little bit what we mean by traditional credentials and then these alternative credentials, this is a degree from BYU. This is one of our beautiful degrees that you'll get. One of our students in this department got this degree, and he said, "I then stuck it up in my closet next to my wife's knitting and never saw it again." And so, it's not very shareable, these kinds of credentials. They're awarded after a long period of time or a great deal of experience. They represent learning from just one place instead of all this learning that you're doing everywhere. Transcripts do provide a lot of information. They are data rich, but sometimes that data is not very useful. I'm going to explain that here in a minute. And the credential is actually detached from the evidence of your learning. So you get a degree, but the degree doesn't show the evidence of what you did to earn that. And in the digital age, we have better ways of attaching evidence to credentials. And the other thing is that the learner doesn't own it. I always thought it was funny that I had to call up my university and say, "Pretty please, can I have permission to see the record of my learning? Can you please show me the evidence of my own education?" We should be able to own that ourselves. These macro credentials take a lot of information, like your test scores, your assignments, how good of a citizen you are, how well you participate, all this stuff, and they pull it into a blender, just hit blend, and then spit out a grade, B+, which in the end doesn't really tell us a whole lot about what you actually learned and what you actually know. It could be that you were pretty good most of the time. It could be that you were the best of the class until you got sick. It could be you're good at some things and not good at other things. Like, it doesn't really tell us those kinds of specifics. So this brings us to this idea of open micro-credentials. So instead of big credentials, small credentials. small credentials focused on specific skills or bits of knowledge that can be transferred across systems. So you can earn some in one place, take them with you to a new place, and not have to start all over again, because those credentials go with you. They can be shared on your CVs, on social media. They can be rich and full of data because they are a digital credential. So even though it's just a cute little image, you can stuff as much information as you want to in there. People ask me, what kind of data do you put in there? It's really anything. Any data you want to put in there, you can. It can be what you had to do to earn it, who gave it to you, when they gave it to you, tags, like what kind of content areas this is related to, what standards this relates to, what standards this fulfills, when this skill will expire. Some skills maybe have a longer shelf life than others. The link to all of your evidence of what you actually did. So if somebody says, well, what does that mean that you got that? You can say, well, you can just look at this right here and it'll tell you exactly what I did. And you can see for yourself what I did, right? So it's all there in that badge. And it was created by the Mozilla Foundation, the creators of Firefox. And their idea was that you would be able to earn these credentials from anywhere, on the job, online, volunteering. They would all come to you. They wouldn't go to your university. They would go to you. And you would own your credential. And then you would be able to decide what to do with those credentials. Which ones to put on social media, which ones to apply for a job, which ones to maybe unlock an opportunity, you know, an internship or something like that. But that you would own these credentials, be able to use them in multiple ways. You can give a credential for anything that you can assess. You could give a credential for, right? Anything that you can find data for, you could give a badge for. Could be for attending something. It could be for completing assignments, having knowledge, playing a certain role in a community, like a leadership role, having a competency, having some character traits, soft skills, career skills, things that don't show up in other transcripts. All of those things could be represented by these micro-credentials.
Rick,
Yeah.
are you taking questions partway through?
Yeah, we can take questions partway through, yeah.
One of the things that I've noticed about
badging and micro-credentials, as you know, it's a fairly new concept people are trying to figure out, but you go to a conference and they have badges, but you say they can represent anything, and they often do represent anything.
Everything.
And
My brother
a lot
gave me
of
this
it
badge
is
for
like,
game design or whatever.
you logged into our website, you now have, you know how to badge. Is there any, movement or efforts within the domain to make these more substantive or help to distinguish the credentials that are kind of fluff credentials from credentials that are more substantial?
Yeah, good question. And that's the Netherlands is focused on that quite a bit, actually. That's something that they're struggling with. These things, you can put as many data fields into this as you can. Another one that's not represented here, that's a new one, is endorsements. You can have people endorse it. So maybe you just got this random O badge, but then it was endorsed by somebody important. That's one piece of evidence. You can align it to standards. So you can, and the Europe is farther ahead of us in that sense. They have these general competencies that are saying like this is what this skill looks like no matter who teaches it. And they have these really clearly defined competency frameworks. So in the EduBadges project, which is the Netherlands, that was who I was working with, was EduBadges. They actually have a way to tag your badge with these European competency frameworks. And you can also tag how much time. They have a credit hour assigned to it. So like if you think this skill, even though it was spread out over a year, equals 1 credit hour of work, you could put that in there. And it would add weight. I call it weight. You add weight to the badge so that they're heavier in their weight. And so you can do things in the decoration of the badge to signal to users about that. But what we need to do is train people to look at this data and start to recognize what things are standardized, what things are attached to standards, what things are endorsed, what things are this. And then you can, once it's all there as data, you can search for it. You can search by a standard and pull up all the badges attached to the standard and see who's earned it, perhaps, or what could be earned, or what all badges has this organization. If I want to work for IBM, what badges has IBM endorsed? And you can go see that, right? So once the data is all there, then you can start to play with that data, I think in really cool ways. Yeah, Niku.
See, I think that answered a lot of the question that I was going to ask, but I was wondering something really similar. Is like, I definitely agree that degrees, macro credentials, can often not have, they can't be information rich, but at the same time they are pretty convenient. I mean, if you're a potential employer, it's easy to be like, okay, this person has a degree, this person doesn't. Whereas if a person comes in and is like, okay, here's 50 different badges that I have that would make me good for your, qualified for this position, then it's really difficult to like sort through all those badges and determine which ones actually are useful, which ones aren't. Whereas, when you have just a degree to look at, it's easy to say, a degree means something, these 50 badges, how many of them mean something and how many of them are relevant.
I agree with that, and my position is always that I don't think degrees are going away, and I don't think they should. They represent engagement at a deeper level over a period of time that can be meaningful, right? But I think they can be added upon this. I actually think the future is going to be something called a comprehensive learner record. And we're already playing with this idea in different places. So kind of like in medical field, you have this comprehensive medical record that is every test you've done. And you get a lot of medical data over the years too, and some of it's more important than other things, right? But it's all there and then can be organized in different ways depending on how you need it in a certain time. I think we're going to have that with education too. So you're going to have your degree there, but then you're going to have all this other stuff too, but it's all going to be part of this comprehensive record. But then the cool thing too though is I think you can then organize it in different ways. So you say a degree means something, but what does it mean? An employer says you have a degree in education, or let's see, a degree, that's
Psychology.
But what?
Undergraduate psychology.
Undergraduate degree in psychology, what can you do? Right? And then you have a conversation, right? And you can do a lot. You can do a lot actually. I'm not disparaging that because you can do a lot with that. But it's not apparent. That's my point. Whereas you could come in, maybe not with 50, because you're applying to a specific job. Maybe you have 50 badges, but for this job, you show them 5. And say, these are the 5 that I think are relevant to your job, and these are the skills I know how to do. You advertise for these skills in your job position. Here are my credentials on those skills that you're looking for. So I actually think you can get more targeted that way. I think back in the back, Shannon, did you have a question?
Well,
Microphone, microphone, please.
Yeah.
I was going to say, it seems like badges are also stackable, which
Yeah.
may not be a direct solution to the bulk, but it helps organize it a little bit.
And these are still really new. They're only about 7 years old. And people are playing with this idea of accretion, where maybe you collect a lot of lesser badges, but somehow they stack into the more, and at one point do they become meaningful? That's the question, right? But at some point they become a more meaningful credential. And they're playing with this idea of pathways too. So that you have a path, and the badges feed into this path. And if you complete a whole pathway, then, it could be like a degree. You say, well, we already have a degree. But the nice thing is, you could also enter or exit that path at different points, right? Like if you get partway down that path, you can change and still take those micro-credentials with you, even though you didn't complete the full pathway, right? Yeah, Joe.
So what's to prevent you from having, let's say, well, I work at a private small little college, and they don't really have regulations on classes. They can say, okay, we'll make a kinesiology class, and they'll hire a dentist to do it. Or they can really do whatever they want. Whereas they don't really have regulations set on them. So how do you prevent that from someone badging someone to go to a private little school, pay $20 and get a badge? And like, how do you say what's
Well,
a
I
qualified
think
badge,
you
what's
just
not?
explained, I think you just proved my point though, because that happens already. You can go to a university, pay some money, and get a degree. And we don't know what goes on in that classroom. You got a B+ in your transcript? Even at BYU, right? You got a B+ in my class? What does that mean? Like, who knows? Did anyone come in and actually watch me teach? Probably not. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, we don't know. Now, the difference with micro-credentials, though, or not necessarily micro-credentials, because this isn't a feature of micro versus macro. This is really just a feature of digital credentials. But when you put the data in there, then at least if somebody says, what does that mean? You got that? I don't know if I know who that person is that gave it to you. Well, I can at least look at what you had to do, the criteria. I can look at what you did to meet that criteria. I can look at, you know what I mean? And I can evaluate it for myself. Right now, that doesn't work with transcripts. You can't go and say, I want to look at Joe's transcript and see whether he actually did anything in that class. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, is there
like Amazon reviews, for example, of badges.
It's been proposed, actually. That's one of the ideas that's been proposed.
Because a degree from BYU means something, right?
Right.
A degree from some unknown university doesn't mean as much, but if it's from a bigger university, it's more well known. But maybe the similar concept would play out in badges of it's been reviewed by this many people and it's got really high rankings as far as.
And now we start to think about flipping the model of education, right? Instead of accreditors, does anyone know who accredited college education? Like, do you know who they are? Like, who knows? This random accrediting board said that BYU education degree is worth something. But we don't know what that means, right? Wouldn't it be interesting if instead the consumers rated the value of the education? So then employers. I hired somebody, he had this credential, and he knew his stuff. 5 stars on that credential. And if we started to kind of, you know, and there'd be some problems with that. We know about Amazon reviews that you can spoof them. But if that could be done, wouldn't that be powerful to get data back? Wouldn't it be good evaluation data, talking about evaluation for us as a department, to see what our employers actually think about our graduates and which skills they actually had and didn't have, right? So it kind of flips this whole idea of value for who gets to decide what's valuable? And maybe it shouldn't be the accreditors, you know? Yeah, we had another hand, and then, was it McCoo and then Charles?
Well,
Or somebody back here had a hand.
yeah, it was just like a clarification question. So like using your example of
Yeah.
being able to look at what people did. So if traditional courses acted more like badging, if for example, when I took your 520 class, and someone wanted to examine that badge and see, okay, what did McCoo actually do in your class, they could go and read the papers that I wrote or look at the assignments that I did and evaluate for themselves if they were like up to their,
Yeah.
what they wanted me to do.
Yeah, when Rick told McCoo to do this, what did he mean by that? Oh, well, here's what McCoo actually did, you know? Yeah, Charles.
So it seems like one of the biggest challenges to this is moving people to thinking more about competencies and mastery, which is, I mean, we've been trying to do that for a decade or more, and it's been a hard
It's hard to
kind
get
of social
educational change.
change to make. I think partly because universities want to, or have been asked to make sorting decisions about students, and this pushes a lot of the, you know, like, what's the difference between someone who got an A in a class and someone who got a B in a class in their ability to actually do something? And, you know, at the university right now, it might actually not mean anything. It means that you were better at doing something than the other people that semester, that year in your class, but doesn't really, I mean, the next semester, you might have been much worse than the next semester for that same grade. So it doesn't really tell you anything about performance. But, you know, the people that hire lawyers or the people that hire whatever, they want to know that this person was first in the class or this person was third in the class. So does this movement have any, I mean, I see a lot in this movement focusing on the technical solutions to the problem, but it seems like the greater barriers to the problem are really social challenges.
Yeah, and maybe I can show a few examples of how, because I think you're exactly right. So badges were created by computer people. And so they looked like a computer solution, which is good because we needed the computer technology to make it happen. I think what's happening now is now we have instructional people thinking about, okay, how can this create opportunities for us to change the way education happens? And that's what I'm more interested in, honestly, too, is how does this change the way we think about teaching and learning? So let me show a few examples about how this works. One, I'll just throw out a couple numbers here. Over 1,500 badge issuers across the world, and 26 million badges have been issued since they started. So it is kind of a growing movement. EduBadges was the Netherlands team. This was the group of people that I worked with there. And what they were doing in the Netherlands was they created a technology solution so that every university in the Netherlands could issue badges if they wanted to. And they got a dozen of them to come on board for a pilot test. And so each of them were given freedom to think how would they use microcredentials. And they all used them in different ways. And so what I was doing was going around and traveling to each university and talking to them and saying, what are you using badges for and why are you doing it that way? Like what problem are you trying to solve with badges? And they all were doing them in different ways, and that was kind of the interesting thing. So a few examples. I'll just skip over some and go to some of the bigger ones. The Hoge School in Rotterdam is a business school, and what they did was they took their degree and actually broke it down into modules and started selling to business employers and saying, you can buy our degree if you want to. You can send your employees here to get our degree. But if you have current employees and they just need skills in a certain area, you can send them for just a module. And then we will give a micro-credential for completing that module. And if they complete enough modules, they'll get a degree. And so it encourages you to continue on. Like you get one module done, then maybe you want to keep going and finish the degree later on, right, if you had a good experience. Georgia State's actually doing a similar thing, where they say their master's degree is 36 credits, which is basically 3 certificates. Each certificate is 4 classes, and each course is 3 badges. So you can stop at any point. Earn badges, earn certificates, and when you're done, you're done. When you've learned all you need to learn, that's great. And if you need to come back 10 years from now because you need lifelong learning, then you might finish it later on. But it's kind of broken up that way. And Europe is really looking at this. This was a group down in Slovenia, and they're looking at what they call short learning programs. So rather than thinking in terms of 2 years and 4 years, thinking in terms of 4 months, what do I need to learn now for my job? And what kind of credential would I get then at the end? And so they were calling it a short learning program. So this is kind of a growing idea in Europe of short learning programs.
Rick, would you say that this is more oriented towards job preparation? We're having a lot of discussion on campus right now about GE and educating people kind of more broadly. Would you say that this movement is more towards like
it tends to, the people who focus on skills only tend to love this idea, but I don't think it has to be exclusively that. And actually, you lead me right into this next slide, so nice job. But this is actually Oklahoma State University, and their approach was, they said, if you have an academic transcript of all your academic skills, we want you to also have a transformative learning transcript. That is all the other stuff that makes you a well-rounded, wonderful employee. And so you look at these skills, it's things like global and cultural competencies, health and wellness, leadership, research and creativity, service and civic engagement. And what they're saying, this idea of this comprehensive learner record, they're saying we don't want you to just do classwork. We want you to also do this other stuff that just makes you a good citizen and a good employee. And they opened this up so that faculty could issue challenges and give credentials in these areas. The community could, employers that you intern for, could credential you in these areas. And so it's encouraging the students to do more than just the academic work. So that was their way of doing it, and they did it with micro-learning as well. Another group, this was actually in Belgium, and I met them at the Open Netherlands Conference. And I loved their approach. So they're doing something kind of similar to this. They called it Gentle Student, which I thought was kind of a funny name. But they identified these 5 kind of learning outcomes that are not just academic stuff, right? It's digital literacy, entrepreneurship, global citizenship, sustainability, these kind of broader skills. And that's what they identified as being important to them. And then they basically came up with this idea that you don't just learn at the university, you learn in your city. And that we want to build cities of learning. Europe has this kind of community approach to things that I love. You see it with the biking in the Netherlands. This idea that community is everything a lot. And so that you're going to have a city of learning where you do all your learning in your city. And so what they did is created a map and identified people in the community who could create learning opportunities and then issue credentials in those different competencies. And you could also do it on campus with faculty. But the thing I also loved is they then used beacon technology, so that what they had was an app on your phone, and you could pull up the app and say, I want to learn X skill or have X experience, and it would pop up and show you who in your surrounding vicinity is offering opportunities in that area. So you could be walking downtown, it's kind of like Pokemon Go, but for skills, right, and learning. And you're like walking around downtown and you say, this business right here that I'm walking by is offering an opportunity here and a credential that I can earn. And it could be things like internships or service learning. Like come spend 4 hours with us on a Saturday and do some work that we need done, and we will give you a credential that shows you did some service learning with us, right? So it kind of encourages people to do this like service learning kinds of opportunities in their community and engage with their community, which can lead to employment opportunities or internships. Because now you've got your foot in the door with this company, right? You've done some work for them, they've gotten to know you a little bit. This app was developed by students and for students to be able to have a bigger learning experience than just on campus. I love this idea. Yeah?
So,
Microphone.
over the business school, we have this sort of tendency to, over the business school, we have this tendency to get the degree, but increasingly recruiters are saying, how familiar are you with Tableau or with Microsoft Excel? And then we get these sort of Microsoft certifications and so forth that make candidates really quite appealing to recruiters. And so on that side of things, how much research has been done on the back end as we look at organizations hiring students out of institutions like our own that have a degree, but like you've talked about, also have these tactical skills that for new time employees in the workforce are really essential, right, to sort of analyze data and so forth. What research has been done on the back end? Because those students are more, I think, are more appealing to recruiting organizations.
Not just tactical skills. I'm going to take what you said is true, but add also the other skills, these career skills like teamwork, leadership, service, civic engagement. I think employers care about that too. In fact, I've had someone here on campus who was a math professor, and he wanted to do a badging project with me, and he said, look, everyone knows our students are smart. What they don't know is whether they actually can like work with people. So we need some social skill badging that we can encourage our students to develop these skills and prove to employers that not only can I solve an equation, but I can work on a team. So I think those skills are also really valued, right? Now, to your question though, not a lot of research on it yet, and these are all still kind of new ideas, but there is chatter about big organizations like Google, Amazon, big businesses, saying they're not sure they really care about a degree anymore. And if you can somehow show validated performance, and they don't know what that means yet, could be badging, could be other things, but if you can show a validated performance of what they want, then that's enough. And all it takes is for a few of those big companies to kind of eschew the degree, and then higher education is going to have to change real fast, right? So I think that's probably what's going to happen, is that eventually the market will determine that degrees are important, but not as important as they used to be, and there will be alternatives that spring up, and we'll have to figure out how to address that. So, let's see, we'll skip over to this. But this is what I think maybe the future of educational credentials could be. I don't know that the future is going to be open badges, to be honest with you. I see open badges as the current technological solution, but I think there could be future technological solutions. But I think the future is going to be more of a comprehensive learner record is what we're going to see. But what I think we're going to see in the future is we're going to see, these are ideas that I think won't go away. The idea that learners control their own data and learners control their own credential. I think that's going to stay. Credentials that are more representative of all your learning, wherever you get it. I think that's going to stay. Credentials that stack and are modular and can represent lifelong pathways rather than just a 4-year experience. And I do believe that universities are still going to be key. We have too much expertise, too many resources. Universities are too important still. But I think universities will play a role in this idea of comprehensive learning and lifelong learning and stackable learning. The last thing I'll say is, and we're going to skip over some of these, is get to a thought about why this all matters, maybe for us in this room, because we care a lot about open education. This is Dave Wiley again, alumni of our program, former faculty member. And he has a chapter in your textbook that I think you're reading for foundations. And he has something in that chapter that I hope you pay attention to. He talks about a framework for open education. And he says, we need these 4 things. And he has spent his lifetime working on open educational resources and done a fantastic job. This is the open textbooks, the open courses, the MOOCs, the stuff that gets all the big grant money and all that kind of stuff. It's really fun to make open educational resources. But what Dave realizes is that open education doesn't work with just resources alone. Resources are not education. That we also need open assessments to evaluate how well we're learning that content. We need competencies that are open and openly agreed upon about what we mean by this skill or that skill. And then we need credentials that can address those competencies. So I borrowed this idea a little bit from Richard Collada. He's the CEO of ISTE right now. That education is more than content. It's about relationships. I've done a lot of work in that area too. It's about content, and it's also about feedback and assessment and credentials. And so that's where I see the value of open badges, is it's not just a flashy little thing that you can put in your LinkedIn. It's actually a big part of the education triangle that somebody needs to address. And so that's what I've been working on. And if that's something you're interested in, come talk to me, and I'd be happy to chat more about how maybe this idea of open credentialing might break open some new ways of thinking about teaching and learning in whatever area you're focused on. So, anyway, that's it. If we have any other questions, or we might be out of time.
Let's give Rick a hand. Over our lunch, and I was just going to add one thought to that. I know that Cecil has been doing some work with Dave Wiley in a class that he took before, where he's added open pedagogy to that list.
That too. Yeah.
Right, which the methods that you use in these open environments. So you might ask Cecil about some of the work that he's doing and the paper that he has in process on that. So thanks, Rick. We'll excuse everybody back to have soup kitchen.